I told the class that I wrote 3 unsolvable equations on the board. I expected anyone with extra time to play around with them, but they weren't actually part of the test. You accomplished something that the rest of us knew was impossible. It's amazing what we can accomplish when we are not encumbered by what we believe is possible. It turns out that George had solved an algorithm around linear programming, which eventually became the simplex algorithm, the heart of Microsoft Excel's solver function. If George had arrived on time to the exam hall and heard his professor tell the class to try to solve the unsolvable problems, he probably would have never accomplished this feat. He was not limited by what the world felt was impossible. Pattern recognition. In most great detective stories, the author typically uses a signature act, or prop. The robber or murderer, either intentionally or unintentionally, leaves a signature mark at the scene of a crime. The detectives in pursuit do not notice it at first, but eventually come to see a pattern. Often, it's about observing a non-obvious relationship between 2 data points, which leads to the recognition of a pattern. The conclusion? Insight can be found anywhere and hides in patterns. But are patterns valuable only to Sherlock Holmes and his contemporaries? Patterns exist everywhere we look. However, it is the actual recognition of the pattern that can truly impact the world in which we live. When studying highly successful people, whether they're athletes or successful business professionals, Malcolm Gladwell argues in his best-selling book, Outliers, that by studying the patterns of these individuals, we begin to understand that the environment from which they come from directly correlates to the amount of success they will have in life. By looking at hidden patterns of these individuals' upbringings, the month they were born, or the culture in which they were raised, we can predict whether they will reach their full potential or perhaps fall short. The same can be said for data. By capturing and analyzing data, we can find patterns that will ultimately impact the future of industries and businesses. Often, observing a non-obvious relationship between 2 data points leads to the recognition of a pattern. The conclusion? Insight can be found anywhere and hides in patterns. Nelson Peltz. Nelson Peltz's coffee mug on his desk reads "Sales up, expenses down" on one side, with "Cash is king" on the other. These mantras helped him to build an $8.5 billion partnership focused on activist investing, one of the largest such partnerships in existence today. However, this was not handed to him. Peltz built this partnership through his ability to see, understand, and apply patterns across a variety of businesses. Born in 1942 in Brooklyn, New York, Peltz worked his way through early school years and eventually decided to attend the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He dropped out a couple years later, in 1963, and set off to be a ski instructor. When that did not work out, he returned home to drive a delivery truck for his grandfather's company, A. Peltz and Sons. Eventually, he was given the reins to the company, Flagstaff, and grew it into a publicly held company. While Nelson did not finish a formal education, his on-the-job learning taught him all he would need to know later in his life. In the 1980s, Nelson reunited with a former business partner from Flagstaff, Peter May, and they went on a hunting expedition, looking for companies to acquire, grow, and eventually sell. His first marked success was the sale of Triangle Industries to Pechenay in 1988. Nelson began to notice the value of spotting patterns in the operations of the companies that he acquired or considered acquiring. Eventually, Trian Fund Management was founded and still exists today. He became a force advocating for change and was an activist investor before the term was en vogue. But how did he do it? Peltz believes that most activist investors and private equity companies focus on financial engineering. While that can make a difference in many cases, it gets you only so far. Very few individuals